How's everybody doing? This is Mr. Nolan, and I have got your 12C and D, Black Death, and the spread or revival of Western philosophy notes for you. So again, that's 12C and D in your packet, and here we go. The Black Death. All right. The Black Death is in the mid 1300s. Portions of Europe, North Africa, and Asia are going to be decimated by a disease known as the bubonic plague. It received the name Black Death because it would cause your lymph nodes to swell. They would press up against your skin and bruise it, and so you'd see black splotches on your skin if you had the disease. Nearly a third of the population of Europe is going to die in a 4-year span as a result of this disease. About 25 million people at the time. So for those of you who are confused about numbers, imagine if you're sitting in class with 30 people, 10 of them got up and walked out. Those are the people that would die. But this wasn't just in your class. This was all of Europe. The plague is originally going to come from Asia, and it's spread via trade routes to other parts of Asia. So it actually originates in Mongolia and is going to spread from there to the Muslim world. And then in the year 1347, it's going to reach Italy. From Italy, it's going to quickly spread to the rest of Western Europe and North Africa. Over the course of these 4 years, it's going to decimate parts of Europe. After its preliminary outbreak, the plague is going to return from time to time, but it's never as severe as it was at first. Okay? What we need to know about bubonic plague is it's not an airborne disease. It's not like the cold or the flu or Ebola. It is spread by fleas that are carried on rats. Okay, so it wasn't actually the rats, it was the fleas that were on the rats. Now, while this may seem gross to you and you wonder how this would be a problem or why anyone would ever get this disease, most people at the time had lice and fleas because they did not bathe. The lack of bathing promoted the spread of disease. If you remember when we talked about the Romans, we talked about one of their largest public health things was the idea of taking a bath once a week. Okay? Europeans in the Middle Ages did not do that. They were worried about surviving and putting food on their table on a daily basis. Okay, bathing was not a high priority. So because of that, again, most people have lice and fleas, and when you've got crawly things in your hair and shoulders, you don't realize what's good for you and what's bad for you. So these fleas are going to get carried over on rats from Asia, and they're going to spread throughout Europe. And when they bite you, you catch the plague. Also, the other thing, and none of you have probably seen a rat because rats happen to stay near trash or things like that. Well, in Middle Ages Europe, they didn't have dumps or waste management services. They just threw their trash in the middle of the street, which is where the rat population would grow. So the rat population was around the commoners. Okay? And this is why the plague had spread so much then, but it's less of a factor now. It's not that we have found a cure. It's that the things that cause the spread of bubonic plague are no longer major factors for us. As a world, we bathe pretty well. We're not as exposed to rats as we were back then. Okay? Impact of the Black Death. You're going to see a steep decline in population. As I said, a third of the population is going to die. A couple of other things that are going to happen. Because of everyone dying, and the vast majority of people who are dying are commoners, it is impacting noblemen too, don't get me wrong. But just on an odds and a numbers thing, you're killing a lot of commoners. So what you're going to have is a scarcity of labor. Okay, without people to work the fields or work jobs, production is going to decrease, and it's going to cause prices to rise. Goods become more scarce, therefore they become more expensive. So now you've got poor people who are going to start to starve because they're not going to be able to access food, which also is going to help spread the disease because you don't have the nutrition necessary to fight it. Trade's going to decline with higher prices and a lack of production. Think way back into October when we first talked about our first trade. You had to have surplus to trade. Okay, you were not going to trade if you didn't have extra. You weren't going to get rid of food and starve so that you could have some luxury item back then. So with a decline in production, we're also going to have a decline in trade. Towns are going to eventually be freed from feudal obligations. Feudalism was still alive and well. Okay, But peasants are going to see themselves dropping dead in the streets and the noblemen sitting around doing nothing, and they're going to start to revolt. So we're going to see some of the end of feudalism here. And the other thing that's going to happen here, guys, is we're going to see a decline in church influence. Okay? And I've got no better way to say this than to make it as blunt as I can. Okay? People are praying to God for help. They're praying to God to make the plague stop, and he wouldn't. And their prayers were not answered. So the Catholic Church, which has been the dominant power and the dominant influence in Western Europe this time, along with the feudal system, are going to see both of their powers start to decline. The feudal system is going to begin to fall apart. The Catholic Church is going to start to lose its control over Western Europe. And this chart down here at the bottom is a population chart for Europe. So as you can see there, it takes almost 200 years for the population to recover from the Black Death to the level that it had been. It's a long period of time. It's a major, major, major thing, and you need to understand that. Okay? But without the Black Death, we wouldn't get the Renaissance. And we'll get into that more a little bit when we get to the Renaissance. A couple of things real quickly. Preservation of old knowledge. We've talked about this multiple times this year, but just to hit it again real fast. In the Middle Ages, education was largely confined to the clergy. Okay, the masses are uneducated. The nobility was concerned about feudal obligations, making the feudal system work and making sure they stayed in power. So if I were the Baron of Bristol, like I would imagine myself being in that time period, I'm more worried about staying in power and keeping my serfs to be my serfs. Don't have time to learn how to read and study things. Church scholars are going to be the people who preserve ancient literature in monasteries in the East and the West. We've talked about this Greco-Roman knowledge being preserved in 3 places: Byzantine libraries, the Islamic world, and then monasteries in Western Europe. Okay, church scholars are going to primarily work in monasteries, and they're among the few that could read and write. They translated Greek and Arabic works into Latin, and then they're going to discover this quote-unquote new knowledge. I'm throwing new in there because we're going to talk about the Renaissance, and Renaissance is the discovery of new knowledge. It's not discovery, it's rediscovery of knowledge that we lost for 1,000 years. All right, it's really not new. We're just remembering things as a result of the Crusades. Okay, this new knowledge is going to spread of medicine, philosophy, and science throughout Europe during the late Middle Ages, and it's going to lead to the development of our first universities. Okay, and our first universities in Europe are going to be centered around monasteries. This is where we get the Catholic school system, which even today still exists. Schools like Georgetown, St. Joe's, my alma mater, St. Bonaventure, are built around monasteries. Okay, that model begins in the Middle Ages in Europe and carries through to today. An example of some of these philosophers is a guy named Thomas Aquinas. Okay, those of you in your Philosophy 101 classes will have to read him. What Thomas Aquinas did is he was a monk, and he combined Aristotle's logic with Christian thought. So he used Aristotle's logic to justify Christian teachings. It's incredibly exciting to read. I'm sure you will love it as a freshman in college. And that should be it for this video, guys. Thank you.